Seeking life-changing knowledge? You've stepped into the right place. Welcome to Bold Perspectives with Samantha Postman. In every episode, discover, explore, and grow your personal or professional self with real and relevant knowledge to help you improve your own life and make a positive impact in the world around you. Tune in for honest insights, life advice, inspirational wisdom, and the occasional salty rants. Because you are meant to live a better and bolder life.
All right, today is part 2 of the series. And if you love it, I hope you join us for the one before and the one after.
I've got a question for you. For the people who don't feel comfortable doing that, or even worse, I mean, this is something that I hear a lot, that, you know, this generation is lazy, entitled, soft, we're all snowflakes, all of this. What do you think is causing that disconnect there?
You know what, if you don't mind, I'm going to use a story to illustrate. That's how I like to, I like to use stories to illustrate something. It's perception. It's a perception issue from the older generation. And I challenge them on it, by the way. Anytime an older person comes and tells me this stuff, I challenge them. I'm like, you know what? There's hope for the future, my friend. Like, honestly, you just got to get to know the right ones, and we should be fostering it, not criticizing. So everyone has a flaw, by the way, every single person. We can choose to focus on it, or we can choose to set it aside and focus on the great stuff. So when I'm with young adults, I mean, there's definitely some things I could call out, but you can call stuff out on me. I just want to focus on the awesomeness of you. And so, and I'm just going to give you an example of where I saw 2 generational issues. I was living in Costa Rica a couple of years ago, took my daughter down there to teach English. We got a teaching English as a foreign language certification. And just a little side note on that, as a little mini rabbit trail. Everyone asks me, why did you go down there and do this? Well, she was thinking about becoming a teacher. And so I thought, well, honestly, how do you know if you want to be a teacher and go into school for 5 years, spend 80 grand, and then find out you don't even know if you're suited for it? So I thought, okay, so I homeschooled her for a semester, took her down to Costa Rica, and she taught English with me for 2 months to find out if she loves it or not. So that's what we did. And she was amazing at it, honestly. Oh my gosh. She was 16 years old, by the way.
Wow.
16.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So she went to school full time. So while we were down there, okay, that was a little rabbit trail. Mamas do that. We're down there. And while we were down there, we're living in hostels. So for 2 months, I lived in hostels in Costa Rica with 18 to 35-year-olds who live, like, I just gravitated. I didn't know this. Like, when I got there, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm living with my people for like 2 months. Do you have any idea what you learn from internationals all over the world in a hostel? Like, it was amazing. I could tell you what the hotel industry should be doing right now based on what I learned from them. Like, I got ideas about how the hotel industry should change based on what I saw down there. Anyway, so there was a gentleman that came in at night, and you know, there's some drinking that goes on, so they get a little loose-tongued sometimes when you're there. And so we were all talking, and this one guy, Australian, he was shirtless, and he had this massive tattoo covering like his whole upper body, right? And so the best thing you can do when you meet somebody with a tattoo and you want to connect is ask them about their tattoo. Like, honestly, if someone's willing to put that on them, there's a story, and you're gonna learn so much about that person by just asking them about their tattoo. Even shy people will tell you about their tattoo.
Oh yeah.
So I love opening with this. So I was just like, hey, tell me about your tattoo. Like, what's the story, dude? And he's like, oh, and of course he was so happy to tell me he was up in Nepal, and he did one of those, I can't remember what the name of it was called. It was like one of those Wawa Nisa things. It's like kind of like a magic mushroom journey. Is this
ayahuasca?
Yeah, but I don't know if it was a different one that he did.
Okay.
It might have been ayahuasca, but it was by a special shaman. And so he did this journey up there. So he's telling me about the journey. And at the time I had never really talked about to anyone who'd done this kind of journey. So I was like, okay, world education. My daughter sits here, by the way, she's 16 years old, world education at my side. It was amazing. So he started telling us about this journey. And during the journey, he saw the mother creator.
Oh,
and he had a really, really, really profound experience, like we hear sometimes with people who talk about those.
Yeah.
And the way he talked about the creator and how the creator connected with him so personally was just so profound to watch and hear him talk about this story. And then I figured something out. He always used the feminine version of it, which usually when we talk about God, it's usually a male version, just because so many people have been exposed to Christianity and in Greek mythology and everything, right?
Yeah.
So I started to pick up something. I thought, I think he might have some daddy issues. But I didn't say anything to him. But I can't anyway. So he kept talking, and then I was like, so he's done talking about this, and it was the mother creator. How Christians would describe God was exactly how he has described his experience with a female creator, which I thought very fascinating. It was like he was a Christian, and maybe he had some Christianity in him. I don't remember having that conversation. I'm rabbit trailing, but I'm coming back to your reason. So further conversation goes on, and I'm kind of curious a little bit. I'm thinking, I want to see if I'm right, because I've sensed in him, I think he might have some daddy issues. But so we just start talking some more. And then I was just like, oh, so what do your parents feel like about you backpacking all over the world? Because by now he's been in Nepal, he's been in China, like the guy's been everywhere, all over the world, to be honest, backpacking everywhere. And he's like, well, honestly, my parents are really disappointed in me. And I'm like, oh, and I'm like both of them. So I'm like, prodding a little bit. And he's like, well, my dad especially. And I was like, oh, what's going on there? You seem like a really great guy. Like, and he was. And he's like, well, my dad just doesn't think I care about the world. And I'm like, what? And he's like, well, I don't watch the news. I don't read the newspaper. I'm not up on current events. He's like, and I'm like, oh, okay. Do your parents like watch the news twice a day? He's like, yeah, they're that kind. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, so what kind of conversations do you have? And he's like, well, my dad will bring up political issues or like different things that have happened locally. And, I don't always know what all those things are. So he just thinks I'm very selfish. I don't care about the world, and I don't know anything about it, and that I'm not a good citizen because I'm not listening to the news and taking part in it. And being informed. I'm not informed. And he doesn't think I should vote because, I'm not informed about what's going on. And right away, I knew exactly what was going on because I see this all the time. And it's just a perception issue. Like the father has been the way his brain works and the way he's been brought up in school is current events, newspapers, that's the gospel. Like that's how when you meet somebody at a coffee shop, you talk about what you read in the paper. Like that's your discussion. But your generation doesn't think like that, and they have the internet. So then I said to him, I'm like, to be honest, you probably have your thumb on the pulse of the world more than your dad does. He's like, what do you mean by that? I'm like, you've traveled and backpacked all over the world. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, literally, I've listened to you for 2 hours and I learned more from you about all of like what's going on in different countries and some cultures and some things that you've saw. And I'm just like, that's what I'm talking about. It's his dad didn't understand that backpacking and experiencing the world was world education. So that was my long way of saying it's a disconnect because their minds are in a completely different space. But the son didn't know to say that to his dad either. Like he didn't know how to say to his dad, well, I am though. I just don't know how to say it. So after we discussing, I'm pretty sure he went back to Australia and told his dad, like, hey, honestly, I do have I do care. And if I didn't care, I wouldn't be, visiting all these people all over the world to find out more about them.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a beautiful story. And it reminds me of one of your atomic essays that you published, the one about how you don't read the news anymore.
Yeah.
And that one resonated with me because I gave up on reading the news a really long time ago. And obviously people do ask, how do you stay informed? How do you know anything? And what I want to say is that there's a difference between being informed in the sense that, about X people who got shot last week and actually engaging in the world to make it a better place. And the reason I don't read news anymore is because I actually just don't like to take in information that I can't do anything about because it depresses you and it makes you feel helpless. So it's so cool that you can sort of see this guy's perspective because yeah, obviously when you travel the world and you meet all these people and you see all these different cultures, like you by definition develop all of this empathy and understanding that literally makes you more skilled in every single interaction you have, even if you don't know exactly what happened on the news yesterday.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great story. I love that.
It's sort of like, it's funny about that news thing. When I tell people that, there's like, what? I've been doing it for about 10 years, probably before everybody did it with COVID. I think it took COVID for people to see how toxic it really was.
Yeah.
And I've been doing it about 10 years. And it's partly why I'm so darn creative. Like people say to you, how are you so creative? How do you run 2 companies? How do you do this? How do you do that? And I'm just like, honestly, I cut the news out. So I have no noise and my brain isn't cycling that through. But I think part of it even, I just get really angry about this. It's a little selfish. I get angry about people thinking they know what's going on when they really don't, because they read something in a newspaper.
Yeah.
And if I tell them I just don't read the news, they pretty much won't talk about it anymore. So it kind of cuts them down, but cuts them down from talking about it further. But like on a personal level, so here's something I hear a lot of people discuss. Like in my particular city, we had a safe injection site. It was a disaster. And a lot of opinions, and a ton of them valid both ways. But what I had the hardest time was listening to people talk about the addicts themselves. Well, if only they would just stop shooting themselves up. Right. Or if only they would just do this, or don't they know they're doing this to everyone? And it was the way they talked about the addicts that really bothered me. And so why it bothered me is because I actually, 4 years ago, I lost my sister to a drug addiction. So it's personal for me. And I know, like, I don't read the news, but I know what's going on because I picked up the phone and heard her talk to me about like what she's going to hawk because she needs this, she needs to feed her addiction. Yeah. Or, I've taken her to detox center, I've picked up the phone every millisecond when she's in detox when she wants to run. Yeah. So, and I also know that there's really not that much support for addicts. Like if anyone wants some ideas about what cities can do, I have some seriously solid ideas about what we can actually do to help addicts long term. Like just here's one example. My sister wanted to go, I know I'm going a little off track, but my sister wanted to go into rehab. So she went to detox, wanted to go into rehab, but here's what she runs into. She's renting. So she goes into detox, but she's renting. Well, what happens when she goes to rehab? Who's going to pay her rent while she's in rehab? Yeah. So part of the reason why addicts don't get the help they need is because they don't have the resources. Like they have no one to pay their rent for 2 months. Well, like, how hard is that? It'd cost the government less to pay an addict's rent while they're in rehab than it would be for them to keep on having, medical system and having to save them all the time. And then storage. Well, here's another one. So let's say she gives up her apartment. Well, where's she going to put her things? I mean, most addicts have burned through all their relationships and nobody wants to take their stuff. And so even just like storage lockers for people who want to go into rehab. I mean, also, I couldn't even get my sister a bed. So she wants to go in detox. I had to phone 6 centers to find a place for her to go. And like, I have a really strong background in understanding how government works and government organizations. So I know who to call. I know what to do. I know but what kind of addicts have someone like me helping them advocate for them? So I was like, I'm going to put this out there. I have an app idea about how to help get people to help with addicts getting help. But like, I didn't learn that from reading the news. And who's going to make this stuff up is people who live it. So I get my back up when people are like, oh, it's just this easy thing, or, they're just doing this. And I'm like, I don't think you understand. There's a lot of emotional stuff going on and they're taking drugs to cover the pain. We need to deal with the pain, not the actual drugs. So yeah, I got my back up about that because people who read the news think they know everything. And then they start telling everyone how to handle it and they don't really know how to handle it.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with you. One of my core beliefs, and I know there's a lot of people who agree with me on this, is that really the only people who should be dealing with a problem are the ones who understand it. And everyone else should get out of the way if they don't. Because otherwise you're just adding noise, you're adding distraction, you're adding animosity, and you're adding judgment. And it doesn't actually help anyone. So
I would like to go a little further with that. It might even be the families of those who are affected who might have should be included in the conversations. Because when you are in your own shit, you can't see very clearly. I think somebody who can be like a translator for both of them might be better than somebody who's self-interest. So for example, like in churches, women are talking about women in leadership. It's still an argument centuries later, and we're still discussing women in leadership. But when women speak up, it comes across as vested interest. So people don't vested interest. So if I speak up for women in leadership, I'm a woman.
Right.
So of course I'm trying to advocate for women. So
okay.
It just has less value. Now, if a male speaks up for females, well, that has more value to it than a female advocating for herself. But in our culture, men can advocate for men can advocate for women, but women can't really advocate for men.
Yeah.
And we can't really advocate for ourselves either, because we are screwed either way.
That's kind of weird, right? That the very people who are the most equipped to talk about a problem don't get taken as seriously as when someone else who understands the problem less tries to talk about it. That's like super weird.
But this thing that I'm saying also applies to addicts. I'm just using addicts because we were talking about that. So if an addict says, I need this, they're like, well, you're blinded. You can only see it from this perspective. And so people don't really take them that seriously.
Yeah.
And they are somewhat like tunnel vision. So an addict probably won't be able to tell you how a business can handle it because they've never run a business before. So you do need people who can talk about like, what's it like to be a business owner with addicts hanging around all the time. And so I think that many times that can be family. There's a lot of family who are lawyers and doctors and business owners, social workers. They're people who understand both sides of the story in a way that neither of them, the people on each side, can't, I guess. I don't know if you saw this lately. I just wrote this on my Twitter. I thought of it the other day. There's no, how did I say this? So you've got extremes. Whenever you get extremes, there's no discussion. There's discussion only happens in between the extremes.
Yep.
Like real discussion.
Yeah.
Unless you just want people who are like, oh yes, you agree with me and saying exactly what I want to say, right? That's why I don't like Facebook right now, because it's all your big cheerleading squad, or it's people who are super negative about it and don't agree with you at all.
Yeah.
There's not really a discussion either way on it.
Yep.
So that's when we're talking about societal issues. It's the ones that are in the ones that have exposure to both sometimes are the best advocates.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think that's necessarily true, right? Because so many statements that get made on Twitter and Facebook they're not very nuanced. And it's because they're not nuanced that they go viral, that people hit upvote, because like it gives you this little emotional jab of like, look how smart I am. But reality is never that simple. So anyone who's really talking about the issue, I think by definition has to be in the middle, because that's where the problem really is. So yeah. Yeah,
and you need to make, even if one party has a really grand idea, if you don't have buy-in from the other parties, you're going to get nowhere. And that's where, like, even just specifically as I was talking about my sister, I can speak business talk, but I can also sit there and talk to people like my sisters. I mean, I came from that world. Like, this is why I tell people, I mean, from where I come from, people either end up dead or dead inside. And that didn't happen to me, but I can go and sit with them and sit on the couch and sit and have a conversation, because I know how to have that. I know how to talk to them. I'm one of them in lots of ways. Maybe I'm not going to dress like this that day, but I'm one of them. But I'm also a CEO. I'm also a CFO. I'm also, a serial entrepreneur. So I can do both. I can do both. So what does someone say? Cross social and economic gaps, I guess. And those are the people you want advocating, because they can talk both sides.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree.
We went totally off base. Sorry. You got me all excited. About talking about some things. You're so fast. You're so fun to talk to.
I'm so glad. I mean, you've got all these amazing life experiences and all these opinions. So I'm just asking you to share what you know. But I do have one final question about your podcast, and I'd love to know your answer to this, which is, so I've been talking to a lot of podcasters from the Ship 30 cohort, and there's this very common theme that people will start and they'll get really excited, but then they'll fizzle out because it's a lot of work to run a podcast. They're not quite getting the reach in the audience that they want. So I was wondering if you've thought about the risk of that happening, and what you think will keep you motivated.
Oh, I mean, that's such a valid thing. I mean, life just gets in the way. So when you even have the best intentions, it's not always because people, fizzle out. It's because life kind of all of a sudden just steps in front of you and says, okay, that's your path is moving and you don't really have much of a choice. So I'd hate to judge on people who just don't finish. And then it just reminds me a bit of, we talk about failure. We talk about quitting. And so I literally just had this conversation with my daughter lately. So just because people are listening to this, and I know there's some people out there who did, I'm going to use the word quit or fail is what people are going to label you. And you might label yourself that. I may have that happen, but I like to think of it a little bit differently. So for example, I like to use stories again. My daughter was at Simon Fraser University when COVID all happened, first year. She wasn't doing particularly well there. The weather wasn't great. And to be honest, the university is not that organized. Sorry, SFU, but you need to hear that. I help young adults all the time, by the way, with like figuring out what they're going to take in school and how curriculum works. And I did my master's when I was 40. So like, I'm pretty versed up on like how everything works in a university and like how you do your breadth classes and all of that. Anyway, it's a gong show over there in lots of ways. And so, she just wasn't doing super great. She came back and she just didn't know what she wanted to do. She wants to be a publisher, a book publisher. She wants to edit books and help people publish. So there's only two institutions in all of Canada that offer an undergrad something in publishing, and SFU is one of them. So she decided to go there. And so COVID happens and they all of a sudden email out that they're going virtual online again, right? Till December. And she homeschooled. In fact, she made the dean's list even when COVID happened, which is pretty significant, but she's homeschooled a few times because we've traveled. So she's probably a little more practiced at online setting than most people. But I'm like, heck, if you don't need to go all the way to that university, pay a crazy amount of money, maybe we can do something different. So I am going to come back to my point here. And so I went looking online, and we had looked at Ryerson University in the past. Well, you're from Toronto, so you probably know what Ryerson is. They're pretty well known for their publishing. And they have a graduate certificate in publishing. And when I had looked at it a couple of years ago, when she was looking at schools, it had said a prerequisite is that you had to have an undergrad or be 21 with industry experience. Well, I went back and looked at it and it said recommended. And so I've got some lawyer background in me. And so I'm just like, and all technical, I'm like, to me, that's a little win. That's a door that's unlocked when you see recommended. It's like, the door isn't locked. Well, it might be locked, but they might give you a key to open it. So I thought, hey, let's check it out. So she emailed the school, sent her resume. She edited all my master's papers. I also wrote a federal budget proposal to the Canadian Federal Finance Committee. I came up with an idea about how to re-stimulate the economy using the tax system and help nonprofits at the same time. And she edited that. So she put all that in there. She puts her portfolio in there. She has an interview and they're like, for sure. They're like, it's COVID. Let's try it. So she's 19 and she gets into a graduate. She's in the graduate certificate program at Ryerson right now. She'll be probably the youngest to ever graduate. But then what happened is she was just like, so this is what the podcasting thing, this is what we're going to go back to, is the same thing. Then all of a sudden she sits down and she's like, but Mom, I'm a quitter now. I'm not going to finish my 4-year degree. She had only finished 1 year of undergrad. And she's like, I'm a quitter. I failed because it was hard. It wasn't a fit for me. I'm a failure. I don't want to be that. She goes, you know what? I'm just going to finish my 4-year degree. And then maybe I'll go do my master's. I'm like, so you can go spend $80,000 just so you don't have failure on as a label, or you want to be labeled a quitter. She's like, but Mom, if I fail or quit at this, maybe it'll just be easy for me to quit again. And she's like, I don't want to be that. Like, I want to be the person who like follows through. I want to be dependable, but not just so other people depend on me. Like, I want to be able to depend on me that I follow through. And which is legit, it's noble, But then I was like, okay, but like, what if we change the word to pivot? I'm like, you're pivoting. So you're redirecting. You're still going for publishing. You're just doing it a different way. And so I would like challenge people, like, if you stop, I would prefer not to use the word quit or fail. Failure is a powerful word to use sometimes, honestly. It's a good teacher. But I would rather use stop or redirect or pivot, because then there's still this momentum that you're moving a different direction. It's not a stop, because fail will be like, as soon as you say fail, it's like, "Bleh."
Yeah.
And then you think, like, visualize that. If I failed, if I said I failed, I would see myself at the bottom of a dark well.
Right.
And I fell all the way to the bottom, and then I have to like figure out a way to get all the way to the top again. Like, that's massive. Like, just a mental energy of that alone is crazy. Like, why would you even try anything again if you think you got to claw yourself all the way back to the top again? But now imagine if you're at the top of the well and I said, okay, let's pivot from here. All of a sudden it's just a movement, honestly. Like, think about basketball. If you're like a guard, right? Like, or like you plant your one foot. It's like that. It's like basketball. You're playing basketball. You want to redirect. You plant your foot down and you pivot. All you do is shift the direction of your body, and boom, instead of going left or going right, you're going the opposite. You're going a different direction. So that's how I like to see it. So yeah, maybe I am going to fizzle. It could be that Elon Musk calls me up and wants me to work as a consultant. Or Mercedes-Benz to work with their heartbeat technology with their new avatar car. Oh my gosh, I got some ideas what they could do with that. Well then, yeah, heck, sorry crowd, I'm not going to be podcasting. Maybe.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, like those sound like pivots worth taking. I don't think anyone would hold that against you.
But it might just be that I just decide that, the energy it's that I need to spend my energy somewhere else. And maybe it's with family, or maybe it's just, I don't know. There are lots of reasons. So yes, it could happen. But I think that if you worry too much about that happening, you'll just never start. Because you're literally saying, it's sort of like getting a prenup. Like, to be honest, I think the statistic is higher for divorce with a prenup than without, because it's like literally saying up front, like what you and I were saying about men and women. It's like, we don't trust that this is going to happen. So we're going to put up all these little in case things. So yeah, I will quit at some point podcasting. I just will. But I'm not really going to quit. I'll just pivot into something else.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that reframe. I think it's a really empathetic reframe. And I think what you said at the end about that fear of failure preventing you from ever starting, like we want to get rid of that. And if reframing this to, I'll pivot my energy to wherever it's most rewarding, if that's what makes someone feel better and gets them to make that first episode, then yeah, like that's a great thing. So
actually what you said gave me the visual of basketball. So like, I don't know if you played basketball, but when I played it, if there's too many people blocking you on one side, it'd be stupid to keep on going that way, because you're going to lose the ball.
Yeah.
Like that just makes no sense. So a pivot, when you pivot to the clear area to get to the net, like that's a smart move. But when in life, why is it that we ever like, well, look, you were going this direction and then you stopped, like you failed, or no, you made a smart move. I mean, football is the same thing. Why would you take the ball and run into the crowd?
Yeah.
I mean, or you were running away and then the crowd came and started to stop you or beat you or whatever. Well, it's time to pivot. And in basketball, you have to keep your foot on the ground when you've got the ball, because otherwise you lose. You've traveled, right? And so that's an illegal move. So you pivot to the area where you have the best path to score.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. No point beating your head against a wall or going up the path of most resistance, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I like that.
Elon Musk again. I did sign up for Starlink the second they opened up. Gosh. I don't have it yet, but I'm on the list. And I was like, I swear, probably one of the first people who went on. I'm like, oh, I want to be on the beta list. And then the second I got the email to be on the beta program in my area, I was like on it. So I'm supposed to be a beta tester for Starlink. So
that's amazing. You're gonna have to tell me about it. I'm so pumped. Like that's incredible.
Yeah, well, for like, if you think about the internet, it was created for consumption, not for contribution. Like, you think it's for contribution, but because how could you consume something if somebody didn't put anything on it? But mass internet was actually meant to download, not to upload. But now you look at cloud storage and all these creators, and the need to upload is significant. But like, mine is like 1.5 megabytes upload.
Yeah.
No joke.
Yeah. No,
and I call the company like every 4 months. Is there anything we can do? Like, I will pay for the equipment. Can we get the better upload? And they're like, no, because I live in the middle of nowhere and I got a dish on the top of my head that jumps off of other dishes. And so I'm really, really hoping the upload will be worth it with the Starlink. That's the one I'm really hoping for.
Yeah, that's huge. No, I think I'd love to see that happen. I mean, obviously in Toronto, I sort of take it for granted. Like, I've never had an issue with upload speed. Like, it's always slower than download, but I've never really thought about it.
It will take me 3 days probably for it to go up all the way.
No way.
Probably.
So that's huge. Like, I feel like once this is up and going, there will be this huge like influx of content from all these places where it just didn't make sense to do this before because no one wants to upload something for 3 days, right?
Yeah.
So that's awesome. That's great. I love it.
Yeah. I'll look and see if I had anything else. I want to ask you a few questions about you. I have some for you.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
One of the things that you would ask me about is just like what would be successful to me. And I know I was talking, it was kind of half joking about the Elon Musk. You know what they say about a joke? There's a seed of truth in every joke. Otherwise, it wouldn't be funny.
Absolutely.
So, obviously, I would be super impressed if he does that. I think what really encouraged me is that when I was talking to Poditize and they were interviewing me to see if they take my podcast on, I was just validating the idea of my podcast, like what I wanted to talk about, which is actually something we didn't talk about, what my podcast is going to be about. And he just said to me, you know what, Samantha, actually, I'm going to read it off because I wrote it down right after. He's like, I think you're going to be infectious in a good way because when people listen to you, they don't know what you're going to say next. So they just want to hear it.
I like that.
He's like, listeners like the unpredictability. And I was like, okay. And he said to me, I honestly think that you possibly could hit at least 10,000 downloads within 3 months of launching. And I was like, what? And then, first the ego kicks in and it's like, yeah. And then the fear kicks in and I'm like, oh my gosh, 10,000 people. Are you kidding me? Why am I doing a podcast? That's insane. I fear success more than failure.
Interesting. What's so scary about it?
Well, I mean, even if you look at like J.K. Rowling, she has to do all these publicity events. And then she says, well, I can't create if I'm constantly doing publicity. Like if you think about Einstein, could you imagine if Einstein would be in today's world? I mean, people would think that he'd be so much more creative, but honestly don't know if he would be, because in today's world, he would be if he's at a university, he'd be put on all these committees and boards that he's got to be on. And then he'd have to be on YouTube and Twitter and like all these things. And so how could he hone in and sharpen his skill when he'd have to like keep so many people happy simultaneously?
Yeah.
And that's the tension that I'm nervous about, because part of the reason why I've been able to grow my super skills is because I haven't had to do any of that. So I worry that it will keep me from continuing to develop. Although my husband tells me I'm a superhuman already. So he's like, I don't understand what more you want to do. Like when I signed up for Ship 30, he's just like, are you trying to be like a superhuman? I was like, I don't know, maybe, I guess. Just didn't really think about it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You said this thing about having to keep all these people happy. Who are all these people and why do you have to keep them happy?
Well, even like Ship 30 for 30, it's like, well, see what your viewers like and then write about that. So,
Sure.
We've got 13 of them now. So look through and which ones had the best engagement and then continue to write about that. Well, there's a tension in that. I can write about what people want to hear, but then at what point do I not get to talk about what excites me anymore?
Yeah.
Because I have a tribe built up from Rome Research. Absolutely love my Rome Research tribe. Like, oh my gosh, they are the most amazing people on the earth. Like they're so giving and kind. And anyway, it's just an amazing community. And then now I have, like Ship 30. And so they know me and they would want me to talk about Rome Research or talk about essay writing, but that's not going to fulfill me. So if my Twitter group is giving me engagement, it's not necessarily a good indication of what I should be writing about. Like they want to hear that because that's the tribe I'm in right now. But I feel like I have so much more to offer the world than talking about Rome Research.
Yeah.
Or talking about essay writing. And so I fear success because success is going to push me to keep them happy and then maybe talk about things that make them happy instead of things that are going to make me happy.
Oh, interesting. Well, I'm sure you've heard the classic quote, right? The Henry Ford one about if you were to ask people what they wanted, they would say a faster horse. I don't know. You strike me as the kind of person who has enough strong thoughts of your own and certainly enough life experiences and worldviews that you don't strike me as a person who's particularly vulnerable to trying to gain the approval of others. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're right about that. I think where it would come in is like when you start getting into like with podcasting specifically advertisers, because they're about numbers. And so just because I want to like, I mean, my one company makes enough that I wouldn't be dependent on a podcast to make an income. So that gives me quite a bit of freedom that other podcasters wouldn't have. But I mean, I've heard it so many times, like you can take something that you're passionate about and it turns not to be passionate when it's all driven by numbers and metrics. Mm-hmm. So even like what you're doing is with metrics. So at what point, maybe that's something to consider. Like at what point am I willing to let go of some metrics so that I have a happy factor? Can you create a happy factor? So like, it's like, if I'm talking about this, am I happy? So then if I'm not, then those metrics just shouldn't be as strong. Maybe I'm willing to take less metrics if it makes me happy.
Yeah. That's, so I like what you said there. And it's interesting that I know it's what our website currently says right now, but to be honest, like Tom and I have no idea what podding is going to become yet. And part of the reason why we're talking to all these podcasters is because we want to get as wide of a view as possible. And he and I have this debate all the time, actually. He really likes analytics. He really likes metrics. He's a product person. Like if you've ever heard of Hotjar, like it's literally tracking like where you click on a site and he sees. So he's a big fan of having hard data to slice. But I think there's a lot else, and I've learned this from the Ship 30 community. There's a lot other ways that people can get fulfillment from podcasting besides just seeing the download numbers. And it's connections with really awesome people that they otherwise wouldn't have met, or hearing feedback from a particular fan that you changed their life in some way. Like all of the things that you mentioned, I think are possible through podcasting. Yeah. And there are no tools focused on those things, right? All the tools are focused on the analytics and the advertising and the numbers. So yeah, I don't want it to seem like we're just focused on metrics. We want to make the experience more rewarding. And if there's more human ways to do that, like that's absolutely where we want to go.
So maybe putting like an ability for somebody to put their own, is there a way to do in your formula, allow the user to measure how they felt when they did a specific podcast, and that somehow that builds into so like what you're doing is combining a qualitative to the quantitative, because metrics are all about quantitative. Yeah. In general, like when we're talking hard data, but there's a qualitative factor. And I think the podcaster should be permitted to add a qualitative factor to the metrics. So there's got to be a way to find a magic space, a magic sweet spot where the podcaster is happy, but the metrics measure enough to make that the sweet spot for both parties.
Yeah.
Did I say that in a clear way?
No, it does. It does. Like all the numbers at the end of the day are completely useless if you, like in the experience, like I've released this episode and I'm seeing people engage with it. If all of that doesn't feel right for you, like the rest of it's just completely irrelevant. So no, I agree with that.
Yeah. Like I struggle with even my content a bit because I have a really strong background in leadership development. I mean, I was what do they call me? I don't know. Do you know what the Global Leadership Summit is?
I don't.
It's a global movement from this Willow Creek Church out in Chicago, and it's really an amazing, really an amazing opportunity for people. It's a 2-day summit, live broadcasted around the world twice. And anyway, I was part of the strategic marketing. My head wasn't in that space. Anyway, it's all up my alley because I'm like, I took a management degree, right? So like, I'm all about business and leadership development and all of that. So I love it. And that's where people want to hear me talk. Like I was in a leadership impact group just a little while ago with other executives in the city. And I love that. And that's what people want to hear me talk about because it gives them value. It's what they can monetize. Like they see the they see the quantitative value of like being a better leader or whatever. But now that I'm kind of out of business world a little bit, I'm still in business world, but I don't really have team under me anymore. I really just want to talk about cultural things. But they do ripple into management and leadership, like even parenting, like just for this global, I'm kind of random, maybe I'm just going a little arbitrarily. Even at this global leadership summit, I was telling all my friends who had kids, I'm like, you should come to the leadership summit. And they're like, are you kidding? Like, I don't lead anybody, or I'm not a manager. I don't work in an office. Like a lot of moms. I was like, you need to go. And then I heard this one mom who had 3 kids. And she said to me later, I heard her talking to another gal, and she's just like, this is a big waste of my time. I didn't learn anything at this leadership summit. How does this apply to me as a mom for, that's raising 3 kids? And I was just like, oh my gosh, like they were talking about multiplier effect and like, so multiplier effects, when you give your team, you let your team go and they just grow. Well, like you can do that with your kids. If you just empower your kids to just grow with something, I mean, look at what you can accomplish as a family if you all take on something or grow this. It's a management, what we would use in management totally works in parenting.
Yeah.
But what she really needed, what I did is I talked to the MC later, and I said, I think you just need to help connect those dots for people. You need to say, some of you are, you're at home raising kids, and this is what you could do is after the fact, like, actually, this is how I would go. I totally went off a little bit. I was, when you go back in your memory bank and you start pulling, I was pulling things off my shelf again too fast. Yeah. Really, what I said to the speaker was, when you're done the next segment, maybe say, that was so cool. This is a takeaway. And then use something that's cross-sector or cross-professional, like personal and professional. Because then the listeners will go, oh, I can take this learning and cross-learn it over here.
Yeah.
Right. So when I'm talking to people about like the stroller idea I have, I mean, it's definitely cultural, it's behavioral, it's like about psychology. It would fall into psychology, I suppose. Behavioral science, it would fall into. However, some of the theory of what I'm talking about would, I think, apply in a management or a business world. So, but how do you cross those over for people? I struggle with that. You can't be everything to all people, but I don't really want to just talk about it in leadership. What we're finding is people want to talk about professional world and they want to talk about personal world. And you're literally, I don't know what La La Land you're from, if you think that those are 2 separate things.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not. Like they're both connected. And so that's what I talk about. And I'm like, talk about stuff that happens between all of them. Because if your personal life informs your professional life and your professional life informs your personal life, well, then they're not separate entities.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a theme that I think I've heard over the course of this conversation, based on the things that you've talked about, is your ability to be in the middle and translate ideas from one world to another, especially when they wouldn't otherwise touch. So you were talking about being able to talk to your sister and the things that she struggles with versus, the government agencies that are putting in the policies that might actually make a difference. You're talking about this guy and his father who didn't understand him that you met on this trip. You're talking about these leadership summits that you go to, and these mothers who don't see that these lessons, like they might be in some specific business jargon wording, but the lessons are absolutely applicable to what they're doing.
Totally.
So I agree with you that that's hard work, but that seems to me to be like work worth doing, because there's a 1,000,001 business podcasts out there that are business for business people. I'm sure there's 1,000,001 podcasts that are like motherhood for mothers, but there's very little that crosses between the two. So I don't know, I see a lot of value there.
I struggled doing that on my own. Like I did my first, I've recorded 4 or 5 podcasts. None of them are released yet, but they're all just me talking. This is the first one talking with somebody. And then I find that easier to be like, oh, it's like this and it's like this, or this story and this story. And so, but just to just go out and talk them, I talk myself. It's very difficult because you don't know that you're trying to connect. You're just talking in a space, and it's not relevant to any one party. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
I hadn't really thought that much about being an interpreter. You probably don't know this about me, but in my first life, I like to say it that way. It's a bit of a joke because I talk about my life in cat lives. In my first life, I was a tax expert for many years. I prepared probably over 7,500 tax returns in my lifetime. Some of them corporate, some of them personal. But I got to meet, there wasn't a walk of life I didn't get to meet in that capacity. So like, even just think for yourself, like we just finished, we're in Canada, so we're not done tax season yet, but imagine like what your accountant or your finance person knows about you. Like, it is the most vulnerable place we can be as a human. And people say to me, oh no, their medical is, but actually no, because people will tell you about their medical issues, even like way more descriptive than we all need to know. Honestly, but they won't tell you about their finances like that. And I used to have spouses that didn't even know each other's finance. Like there was like the Chinese wall when it was like talking finances, even between spouses. And so when you do a person's finance and they know, you know, all that about them, there's nothing that you can't not know after that. And so like even medical. So I would see all their finances. And so I'd see how they spend their money, what kind of money they make, what kind of education they have, how they spend their money, if they're saving, if they're not, if they're in debt. But then I would also, because I'm doing their tax return, I also see, where do you live? I also see all their medical, because your medical expenses all go on there. So they're like, really, I know more about you than your doctor does. So pretty, you know, and I have to ask a lot of questions about medical sometimes, because there's certain deductions. I have to ask a lot of questions. So what it did is it gave me a special view into people's lives in a way that you just wouldn't get in any other occupation. And so like I 1 minute could have a CEO in front of me, and the next minute I'm talking to somebody who's a custodian, a custodian at McDonald's or something like that. So huge difference. And you're switching constantly. I got to switch the way I talk a little bit, and I'm taking complex concepts and explaining it to in a way that they understand. But I got to listen. So the cool part about it is I got to hear, like, I'm dealing with all the employees. So the employees are telling me what's really going on. They're telling me what's really going on at work. Not the stuff you read in the news, like what's going on that. But then the business owners are telling me what's really going on too. Like people have no idea, like restaurants, for example, have one of the most narrowest margins there are. And everyone's like, oh, you're a business owner, you must be rich. If you had any clue how many restaurants I saw that had 2 mortgages on their home, because either remortgaged their home to go and to start the restaurant, or it just got so tight that they needed to do it to pay their staff, or their wives, if it was a male owner, then their wives would go and get a second job so that they could pay the staff and keep the restaurant open. But people don't see that. They're like, oh, my restaurant's not paying me good enough money, and they're beaking off. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I know your owner. And they're like working 2 jobs to make sure that you don't lose your job.
Yeah.
But I would see both perspectives. And it gave me the perspectives I gained and saw and learned from so many people. And then also, because I did it for so many years, I got to see the same person or same couple or same family over a 20-year span.
Yeah.
So you get to see where they were when they were 20, and then where they were in their 40, or where somebody at 40 and 60 is, and 60 and 80. And so, I learned a lot about the world. I learned about organizations. I mean, I've seen pretty much every T4 there is. Well, so government agencies, political campaigns, universities, like any job that you could have in Canada, I've seen that person has probably sat in front of me at one point. I've seen every investment there possibly is. I've seen how every mutual fund, I've seen how every, like for insurance policies, I could tell you the difference between like a term policy, which would pay an annuity in the end, or one that's just an insurance policy. I saw everything that you could even possibly imagine. And you get pretty educated on what's going on in the world. And so that's part of the reason why I can talk about so many things and talk to so many people.
Yeah. Not only do you seem to have this ability to, bridge these extremes, it seems to me like you thrive in it. Whereas it seems like it's a thing that a lot of people maybe back away from. So what do you think, and this is like a very personal question, what do you think has made you this way?
Probably anytime someone's really, I hadn't really thought, I do thrive in that. I hadn't thought of it like that. I find that I love the challenge. I love connecting with people and finding ways to connect with them as a person. I love helping people. Like, you have no idea how much joy I'd get when I hear somebody say, oh my, I can finally get that computer so my kid can do do their schoolwork at home. Or, I would get flowers and all kinds of lovely things sometimes from people. But there's some pretty cool magic tricks you can do when you're a tax preparer. So it's pretty cool. But I think that anytime that you thrive in something, it's probably because you hurt in a way yourself. And yeah, okay, I'm going to get a little triggered here. I didn't really, you probably hit a spot there.
Oh man.
I'll share, when I was young, my mom, I was born to a teenage girl and raised by a teenage mom. My life, I'm not going to get into all of it here, but is not what most people, when you see me, you would never guess it. And so I remember I was talking to you about my sister, like, from where I come from, people make it out they're dead or they're dead inside. Like, I come from the wrong side of the tracks. And so I was the misfit. My best friend in elementary was the girl that no one talked to. She had this ear condition, which would, I don't know, there's some sort of fluid that came out that had an odor that people didn't like, so they wouldn't talk to her. And she was like my best friend. And I had no other friends. No one talked to me. I got bullied unbelievably. Any chance. The girls were just ruthless little things to me. I had crazy acne that started when I was really young. And my breast started to develop really young before all the other girls. And the boys started pulling my bra strap. And my mom, I don't know why my mom tells me this, but she comes back and she's like, oh, you know what the teacher told me that all the kids say about you behind your back, like after parent teacher interviews? Well, apparently they were calling me Dolly Parton behind my back. And I was just like, it really hurt my self-esteem. I started to I used to play the violin and I would just go like this. My teacher's like, you can't play the violin like this. But I was like, and I wore stupid amounts of makeup to cover my face because I thought I was so hideous and ugly. And I think I'm like the ugly duckling story. I started out as the ugly duckling and then later turned out not to be the ugly duckling. But it was harsh being the ugly duckling with all the other swans. And I had death threats in my lockers. I mean, I had a horrid experience growing up. And I just wouldn't wish that on anyone, honestly. I did okay. I did okay. I have no idea how sometimes. But I really don't want other people to feel like they're not valuable. I want them to feel like people see them because, like, I see you. That's what I want to say. I see you. We just need to be seen.
Yeah.
I see who you are. I see all the beautiful things in you. I see your potential. And yeah, I just don't want people to hurt like that. And I don't want people to struggle as much as I did. I mean, that's partly what made me strong, but not very many people are that strong. I mean, my sister was so much like my personality and she didn't make it out.
Yeah.
She's so similar to me. We're half sisters. We didn't grow up together. Yeah. But yeah. I guess I'm slightly motivated by that. And I didn't have opportunity. I worked at McDonald's for 4 years when I was a teenager. I had no networking, no name, no connection. I was a welfare kid. And I had to do it all myself. Like, my kids, they're Dutch. They got a Dutch heritage father. They live on a farm. They just walk up and say, I want a job. And people are like handing them jobs because they know they come from good family, works hard. I didn't have any of that. So, and I just want other people to have opportunities, which is why I like young adults. I love helping them get an opportunity. And like, they just need to prove themselves because it's there. Someone just got to hand them an opportunity. So, and I see that with taxes too. Like, the government doesn't spend our money particularly well. So I just took it upon myself to make sure they get the least amount possible within the legal framework. Yeah. So that was my goal. I was just like, you know what? So yeah, I love that. I love like explaining things to people where there's like, oh, I get it. I get what you're saying. And it's a challenge, but I don't know. I didn't realize I love that so much, but I do.
Well, it shows in everything you say. I guess now might be a good time for me to ask the question that I didn't realize I didn't ask because we've been talking about so many things, but what is your podcast going to be about?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I want it, honestly, to be honest, it should have been called the Samantha Postman Show, but apparently that's super narcissistic and people don't love it. And so you're not supposed to do it. And I didn't want to call it that for narcissistic reasons. I just didn't want to be put in a box because once you put a name, like a label on it, it's like, well, now you got to talk about this one thing. And so I'm really struggling with everything in me. Like I'm feeling claustrophobic just talking about what's my one thing, like my brain is just going, stop, just get out of the coffin. There's no room to breathe in the coffin once you put a label on yourself. And so so it's really going to be, I think my one friend calls it potpourri. Like it's going to be a bit of anything that I feel needs to be said. So sometimes it's going to be about leadership. At the moment, from what I've recorded, it's mostly cultural. Like it's a bit of a Seth Godin kind of go at the world. Like let's bend the culture. Like I'm talking about Santa Claus and strollers. But I'm also going to talk about things. I want to talk about things like what my clients said to me. I did an essay on that. You know, my clients were telling me like what they would want the younger generation to know. A lot of times when you read these things like, oh, you know, nobody died in their deathbed wishing they worked more. Well, who did you ask that question to? Males? Because I'm sure a woman wouldn't have said that. So you're not representing the population when you're asking, when you make that comment. Like, what do women say on their deathbed? I want to know that. Do they wish they would have pursued their career more? You probably have more women say that than I wish I would have, also pursued my career when my kids moved out or something. I went back to school. It's going to be, I think, mostly cultural growth, because once you learn something, like when I talk about Santa Claus, when the next gen has their kids, they're going to think about that and go, do I want to make my kids believe this lie? And then I keep faking it for them. And then later I'm wondering why they don't really trust me, or they don't really respect me. And then we just don't connect those dots. And so, yeah, I guess maybe that's my podcast, is helping people connect the dots in the middle. I don't know. Maybe you're helping me figure out how to say it. I honestly just don't even know what to say it's about. It's just about life. It's about doing life and anything that could possibly happen in your life. Nobody just grows up, goes to school, and does one thing. I mean, maybe a few, but that's just not happening anymore. So if what I can say can prepare somebody for something that's coming ahead, I'll consider that an accomplishment. But they won't get there if they don't have a big category that says, here's this category. So it's probably going to be psychology, more or less psychology. Yeah. You know what? It's probably going to be a little bit more. It's probably a lot of psychology. Yeah. Unless you have an idea for me, because that's one of my feedback requests. Tell me what niche I am.
Tell me what niche I am. My goodness. This conversation's gone so many different places, and they were all great. But I do think, obviously it'll change over time and you'll iterate. But I do think the consistent theme I've heard in everything that you've said is this idea of connecting in the middle, and the magic that can happen there. And the fact that conversations aren't happening there because it's hard and there's not a lot of people who can do it. I think if you keep digging in that middle, I think you'll find a lot of really great stuff.
It just reminded me of a picture. It was right before COVID. Yeah, well, guys, had some young adults together, and we did a theme together. I called it a life. What did I call it? Anyway, it's part of the discussion with the young adults. We were talking about black and white, and we try to be this black and white world. Taxes, people think, are black and white, but there can be some gray, but less gray, actually. I like math because I didn't like gray growing up. It's either one or I like a right or wrong answer growing up. So it's surprising that I'm in the middle so much now. My mom always says I'm a black or white person. My husband tells me there's either on or off. There's no in between with you, which is funny. People always tell me there's no in between with me, but yeah, I talk in the in between. But what you reminded me of something that I would want people to take away. So you've got your dark. I'm not going to use black and white. I'm going to use dark, and I'm going to use light. So we've got dark and light. We've got daytime and we've got nighttime. But what is the most beautiful time of day? When do we get the most light? When do we get the most color? When do we get the vibrancy? When is it?
Do you want me to say dawn or dusk?
Right. The sunrise. It's when it's not dark, or it's not all the way dark and it's not all the way light.
Yeah.
That's where the beautiful part is. So when we make all these it's either this way or that way. Culture is always like that. It's either this way or this way. It's women are leaders, or men are, it's not like that. It's not meant to be an either or. It's meant to be like a sunrise or a sunset, where you get the beautiful when it's not all the way one or it's not all the way the other. That's where the beauty is.
Yeah. Why do you think people search for these simple answers then? Like, why do we go to the extremes?
Because it's crocodile brain. We're meant to survive. And so that's just a quick, am I going to survive or not survive? That's who we are. But we've evolved a lot from caveman days. So it's not okay to just be in survival mode all the time. It's okay to stop your brain and say, wait a minute, I'm not a caveman anymore. Stop for a second. And then just take some time to just be comfortable with thinking things through for yourself and not being so worried about what everyone's going to think about it. Like, what do you think about it? And also, what do you think about it right now? I like to sometimes especially when I'm mentoring young adults, they'll make these comments that make it sound like it's going to be something forever. And I'm like, no, that's how you feel right now. Because once you put a line in the sand and you say, this is how I feel about this, you've now put a line in the sand and you aren't going to make yourself lie to yourself. It's actually called cognitive dissonance. You're not going to lie to yourself. You probably know what that is. And so you're not going to make a liar out of yourself. So once you put a line in the sand, it's really hard to change. But we do this all the time. We put restrictions on ourselves just by putting all these lines in the sand. So it's a black and white. I either think yes, this, or I agree or disagree. Like, we have this one friend and she says, I just can't talk to anyone who can't just choose a side. And I'm always like, that's terrible. But I think it's survival. She needs to know, are you with me or are you against me? I just need to know that. But why? We can support a side, but we don't have to choose a side. And supporting a side doesn't always mean you're choosing it, by the way. So like, if I have two friends that have divorced, people are going to like, it's black or white. I'm going to choose him or I'm going to choose her. That's the simple answer. Mm-hmm. No, I can love them both. I can support her because she needs it. And I'm a female and that's a healthier support, but it doesn't mean that I'm choosing her side. But people oversimplify it. And they're like, well, you support her or you're choosing your side. No, I'm supporting a side. I'm not choosing a side.
Yep. No, I think you're completely right. There is this tendency to search for simple answers.
And there is a place for that. Like, someone told me a while ago that I think way too much. And it was definitely done in a not very nice way. They're like, you think way too much. And I remember thinking, you don't think enough. That's not very ugly in me, but I was just like, this person was oversimplifying things. And I was just like, things aren't as simple as you say they are.
Yeah, it's not a very nice thing to say to someone. It's quite a judgment.
They were being judgmental. But, I also got to see a little bit of ugly in my own self. And when somebody challenges us, we get to learn about ourselves. So there's value in that. Because when the person said, you don't think enough, I learned something about myself that I wouldn't have learned had he not said that to me. I learned that it's valuable for me to be around people who think a lot. And I wouldn't have necessarily come to that conclusion had I not been challenged to it. So it helped me go, you know what? You're not my people. Like, I like you as a person, but you're not somebody I want to like intellectually engage with. So that helps you. So like, it reminds me of when my son went to do a ministry in Chicago, and it was just a horrible experience for him. And he went down there, wanted to save the world and do some good for the homeless down there. And which was, great, but he had a terrible experience. And he was like so upset because he didn't have a great experience. He wanted this wonderful experience of his lifetime, had given up a lot to go, a lot of Sundays, a lot of, he'd done fundraising and missed out a lot of family things. And then I said to him, but you know what? You learned who you're not. And that is so valuable, because when you can say, this isn't who I am, then you can focus on who you are. So anytime we get those opportunities and they hurt, we get to learn who we are and who we're not. And that's really valuable. So when someone gives you a life lesson, whether it comes across rudely, we can still thank them inside and be like, I learned something that was super valuable from that interaction.
Yeah. Yeah. This reminds me of someone's atomic essay that I read. I can't figure out who it was, but this headline was so good. It was, your values aren't really your values until you've sacrificed something for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think with young adults, I get that a lot. They're like, oh, I really value this. And I'm like, okay, well, what are you doing what are you doing for that? And they're like, well, what do you mean? And they're like, well, I really value something I really value, authentic relationships. And then, and then I'll be like, oh, okay, well, what are you doing? Like, like, I might ask more questions. Maybe that wasn't a good example because it's a harder one to do. And then once we start talking, and I'm just like, they're not being authentic at all. Like, they're not engaging with community. They're just watching Netflix all the time, or, Minecrafting, if that's what they're doing, and they're video gaming all the time. And I'm always like, there can be authentic relationships in that, but not the way they're thinking. So I'm just like, well, do you really value it, or is it just wishful thinking? So it's really important for us to understand the difference between a value and wishful thinking. But we usually think they're the same thing.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it's aspirational, right? There's values that we wish we had, or maybe wish we lived by. So,
but if you're not living it, then it's not really a value to you.
Yeah.
Like, when I come across, I'm a full-time working mom, and she's like, I really want to be with my kids home right now. Personally, by the way, if I have any moms listening to this, I think a very important time to be home, if possible, or any parent in about the 14 to 16-ish age, is to be around a lot. They always say the start and the beginning is the most important. Anything is the only thing you remember. Like, when you think about your childhood, what do you remember? Most people will say they'll remember their last few years more than anything else. If it was a terrible experience in your home, that is going to set your relationship with your family and your parents, probably could even be for a lifetime, based on how those last years ended. So that's why I recommend 14 to 16, because around 16, you're pretty much just doing stuff with your own friends. You're not really around your family a whole lot anymore. And at 14, most kids will still listen to their parents to a degree. At 16, they're not listening very much. So it's really important to be around. So I was talking to this gal, and she had kids around that age, and she was saying to me, I really want to be home for them. I really want to be home for them. It's so important to me. Well, then she was taking on extra work at work. And I was just like, I thought you said you value spending more time with your kids right now. It's really important to you. She goes, well, it is. And I'm like, you just took on more work. And she's like, what do you mean? And I probably was a little too bold, but I was like, well, it's admirable that you want to do this, but you say you value wanting to put this last investment in your kids, but everything you're doing is the opposite of that. So then I guess it's just wishful thinking. And she just went, oh, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I said way too much. But I was like, to be honest, in my brain, I was just like, these kids at home are screaming for you and they want you, and you just took on an extra job. And so I'm thinking about the kids, and I was just like, so I felt like I was like trying to advocate for them and tell the mom, like, shake her a little bit, like,
yeah.
So, but then she didn't take it very well.
Thanks for listening to Bold Perspectives with Samantha Postman. We'd love to hear which insights added value to your life or the lives of others. To help support the podcast, please share the love on social media, leave a rating or a review. If you don't want to miss out on exclusive content, sign up for her personal email letters. Check out Samantha's website at samanthapostman.com. Follow her on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram. Thanks for your amazing support. We'll see you again. And remember, you are meant to live a better and bolder life.